Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today is going to be a very opinionated video, and I'm going to be talking about some NBA fan bases that I personally really would not want to be a fan of. Now, this isn't always just because of the team that they have built right now. Sometimes it's organizational stuff, sometimes it's just some of the history behind the team. For whatever reason, I just really would hate to be a part of these fan bases for a variety of reasons. And one other side note really quickly before the list gets started, I will be doing this in the opposite direction in terms of fan bases that I wish I could be a fan of in a separate video. So if you feel like I'm being too negative in this video, there will be a positive version of this down the road as well. Now, first up, we're gonna be talking about one that probably comes a little bit out of nowhere, and that is the Houston Rockets. And this seems a little bit strange, right? Because the Rockets are kind of at the forefront of this analytics-based vision in terms of how basketball should be played. Lots of free throws, lots of threes. James Harden being such an outstanding player. They have Russell Westbrook. They've been record-wise one of the best teams over the last 3 or so years. And it seems like this would be a great franchise to be a fan of. But for me, there's a couple of things here. One, I don't love their style of play. It's fun to watch when they're making shots, but other times it can just be a bit of a slog and just not all that entertaining to watch, even as great as it would be to see James Harden put up 40 a night. It's not the most entertaining thing in the world in terms of their current team, but more than that, it's just about, this is kind of the ultimate good in the regular season, but not sure what you're going to get in the playoffs team. Now, they've made the conference finals, obviously, a couple of times, and they've had plenty of success over the last couple of years. They probably should have made the finals once and probably won a championship that year in 2018 when Chris Paul got hurt in the conference finals. But it still would just be in the back of my mind all the time if I was a Rockets fan, thinking this team could fall apart at any moment in the postseason, whether that's because of James Harden's postseason struggles, which I think have been overblown a little bit, but it's still a very real thing that he's just not as effective in the postseason, or it's just this team that relies so much on three-point shooting that if shots don't fall in the postseason like they didn't in 2018, then that would just always be in the back of my mind that, like, okay, we're winning, we're on pace to win 50 games, 60 games. When we get to the postseason, I'm not sure how well this team is going to play. And that's almost worse than your team just being bad and not having expectations. Like, part of being a fan of a team that makes it so tough is you have to balance the, oh, we're good, but it could fall apart at any moment, part of being a fan. And I think the Rockets have that situation, but to like a times 100 extent, with the history of some of the players on their team, like James Harden, as well as some of the demons of like that 2018 playoff run when they should have made the finals. And so at the end of the day, I wouldn't be able to trust my team. And that would be such an awful feeling, to not be able to really enjoy the success that they're having in the regular season, or even at times in the postseason, because it could fall apart really at any moment. And like I said, this is kind of a surprising one. If you guys have others that you would like to share with me down in the comment section below, I would love to hear about them. Moving on now to a bit more obvious one, and that is the New York Knicks. And there's a variety of reasons for this. Obviously, they're not very good right now. They haven't been good for the last couple of seasons. They've made some questionable decisions in terms of personnel, and it just doesn't ever really seem like they're going to be able to turn this around under the current ownership structure. And it's not just that. Like, there's the organizational issues, and I could go over that for 10 hours if I needed to, but it's also just about the fact that there is always this little bit of hope, right? Like, there's always this little thing that says, oh, we're the Knicks, we're going to be able to get free agents, people are going to want to play here, it's Madison Square Garden. But it just never happens. I mean, they had that one good team with Melo when they shot a ton of threes, and other than that, there just hasn't been very much like real tangible, we could potentially make the finals success for this team in a really, really long time. And that's such a frustrating thing as a fan base, knowing that your team has some inherent advantages, being in New York, being one of the NBA's premier franchises, playing in Madison Square Garden, but also knowing that your team is just completely unable to capitalize on those advantages, and also knowing that organizationally it's a complete mess, and just to have no faith in the people running the organization, whether it be ownership or front office or even coaching at times, to do things the right way, and to see all these other teams in smaller markets at some point have some kind of real sustainable success over the last 20 years, and to not have that would just be incredibly, incredibly frustrating. And I think, like I said, this is an obvious one, but it still is worth mentioning because it would just be awful to be a Knicks fan. And like, I understand that seems kind of strange because, I mean, I'm a Nets fan and we haven't been very good for the last 20 or so years either, but there's been blips of success. And the nice thing about being a Nets fan is I never expect anything, right? Like, there's no expectations of us ever being good. So when we are, it's kind of this nice little surprise. Whereas for the Knicks, they're constantly awful, but there's constantly this expectation that they're going to somehow turn it around at some point, and it just never really happens. Moving on now to number 3, and this one I think is going to get a lot of hate. And that's the Philadelphia 76ers. And it's really strange because this team is, pretty successful now, looks to be a team that could potentially make the finals in the Eastern Conference this year if they figure some things out. So right now, like, they're a successful team. So you would think I would want to be a fan of this team, but really, I think I would be more on board with this team back during the Sam Hinkie stuff than I would be right now, because this is kind of like that vision realized, not to the extent that maybe Sam Hinkie had hoped initially, but this is kind of, this is the team that you're going to have, and there's nothing really to hope for moving forward except for internal improvement. Whereas there's just so much hope back during, the Sam Hinkie era about what could be for that team. So that's kind of just a weird way to think about it. The other part of this, though, is this has to be, in my opinion, the most overdramatic fan base in the entire NBA. If something goes wrong, whether it's Joel Embiid not scoring at all the other night, or Ben Simmons shooting struggles, or Brett Brown's coaching decisions, whenever something relatively minor goes wrong, it seems like the world is ending in Philadelphia. And I noticed this with fans on Twitter or in my YouTube comments, whatever it is. This fan base just does not really know how to handle things going poorly very well at all. And it would just be so difficult to constantly deal with that back and forth of, we need to trade all these guys away, or we need to, fire this coach, or just every single time something bad happens, it's like we just need to completely restart. And so I wouldn't want to be a part of that. And so this one, more than anything else, even though, like I said, the basketball right now is good, just like the Rockets, I don't know if I'd be able to deal with the rest of the fan base very well. And that's no offense to anybody that is a Sixers fan, and maybe I'm just interacting with the wrong ones, but that has been my overwhelming impression to this point of Sixers fans, is just that there's so much drama around the team, and I just personally, I wouldn't want that as a fan. Moving on to number 4 is the Detroit Pistons, and this one's pretty simple. It's just about a team that is constantly in the middle in the NBA. They can't ever seem to truly bottom out and try and get like a franchise-altering player, but they're also never really championship contenders. I mean, I know from a historical perspective, it's actually pretty good to be a Pistons fan. You have the championship in the mid-2000s. Those Billups teams were really, really cool and hold a really special place in NBA history in terms of their uniqueness as a championship team. And then you got the Bad Boys Pistons as well. But in terms of the last 10 to 12 years, it really hasn't been great, and I would just hate to constantly be in the middle, because this doesn't seem to be a team or a franchise that is committed to doing any kind of complete teardown of their roster to really reshape it and try and be a legitimate like top tier team in the East. And I respect the moves that they've made, whether it be like the Reggie Jackson trade initially, getting Blake Griffin, bringing in Andre Drummond and his development. And I can understand on paper how you would think maybe that's going to put them in contention and for like the top 4 in the Eastern Conference or something. But in terms of like a true championship contender, they haven't been remotely close in a really long time. And that would just be so frustrating. Like I said, personally, this is just me as a fan, and this is a very opinionated video. I would rather my team be in contention to win 50 plus games and potentially make the finals every year, or I'd rather them lose 60 games every year and only win 20. Like, I would want to be in one of those two areas, and the Pistons just reside right in the middle of all that, and I wouldn't be able to handle it. There'd just be no hope. Even though we could potentially push for the playoffs at any point, there just wouldn't be any hope of anything more than that or anything less than that in terms of getting a high draft pick and the hope that would possibly bring to the franchise. So historically, I understand why it could be good to be a Pistons fan, and they have more championships in my lifetime than any of my teams that I root for in any sport, but it would just be incredibly frustrating, the lack of progress, and just kind of feels like they're just hanging out and they're not really committed to building like a true championship winning team, and that would be incredibly frustrating for me. And then last up now is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it's pretty simple here. The success of this franchise for the last 15 years has been based solely on LeBron James. When this team does not have LeBron James on the roster, they don't play well. Their most wins in a season in which LeBron wasn't on the roster is 33 in terms of this century. When LeBron's not on the roster, when he's been in the league and he's not on their team, their most wins in a season is 33. And that would just be so frustrating to know that, first of all, I mean, they had the championship 2016, which had to feel incredible. And they've had plenty of success when LeBron has been there, and I understand that. But just knowing that you're never going to get that again, and that's been the one thing that's made your franchise good, at least this century. I understand the success of pre-2000s Cavaliers teams at times, but it would just be so incredibly frustrating knowing, man, we don't have LeBron, like we're not going to be any good. And I know down the road, maybe they'll get a high draft pick, maybe Garland and Sexton can turn out to be something. And it seems like they do have relatively smart people in charge now as well, and they're playing okay this year. They've got some trade pieces. I understand the potential hope moving forward, but it just feels like that's something that's always hanging over this team, is like, if LeBron's not there, we're not going to be any good. And I don't really know how you rectify that unless you just continue to bottom out and try and get top picks. Now, I will say, if I'm ranking them, I'd rather be a Cavs fan than a Pistons fan, at least at this point, because it feels like they're committed to getting top tier talent in the draft and then potentially, moving some pieces around from there to try and be really good, as opposed to just being stuck in the middle. But just knowing all the time that if LeBron's not on the roster, you're not going to be any good over the last, 20 years or whatever, that would be super frustrating. So for me, the last team on this list is the Cleveland Cavaliers. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.